Hi there, Liz here, and we are at EMO's Creative Studio, where anything and everything you create is beautiful because you created it. And today I want to talk about thread weight and a brief touch on stitch length. I am a sewer for over 40 years, and I learned how to make garment sewing. Garment sewing, you're just used to one kind of thread, one kind of thread. There is no changing the stitches or no changing a stitching length or anything like that. So when I started quilting, I had a learning curve because I had to learn what it was like to know what my stitch weight was or the thickness of my thread, and I had to know the different kinds of thread. There are many kinds of blends of thread. I have and I prefer cotton, or let me rephrase that, 100% cotton or 100% polyester or 50-50 cotton and polyester blend. Now, as you can see, I have 3 tubs here. Each one is marked with what I have in it. This one is 50 weight cotton. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what the heck is she talking about 50 weight? Sewing thread is classified by the thickness, and the thickness is called weight. I don't know the exact justification or reasoning why. I just know that the higher the number you go, the thinner the thread you have. So 50 weight is the most common weight or thickness for piecing and for garment sewing. Then you start to work your numbers down. I'm not familiar with making higher numbers because I won't work with anything higher than 50 because I don't want it to break easy. I don't want it to fall apart easy. That's just my preference. So I have 40, 30, and 12 weight thread. 12 weight thread means that my thread is going to be super thick, and it's going to you're going to see it better for in whatever project you're using. And later in this video, I will show you some stitching links along with the different thread weights. So let's open up this one. This one is marked cotton 50 weight, and I have several spools of thread that I've collected through the years. I tend to collect thread or purchase thread that will not give me a lot of lint. With that being said, that means I do not spend $1.99 on a spool of thread. I do not own any larger spools of thread than this. This one I think is 1,000 yards. And this particular spool of thread costs $12. That's my choice. When I see it on sale, I get more than one. There are many brands of thread. After all these years of sewing, starting off with the least inexpensive, which is Coats & Clark, and I will not use that anymore because for me, personally, it breaks very easily. So I moved from Coats & Clark's to Gutermann. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. And this is a relatively priced thread that's made in Greece. It doesn't have a lot of lint. It's 100% cotton. And again, this particular bucket is 50 weight. So this is the perfect weight or the perfect thickness to sew or piece, which I will show you right here. You know, it's pretty sturdy. It doesn't break that easy. You know, I have to use a lot of strength to get that to break like that. So, in my quest to find different types of thread, I learned about Aurifil. And that's what this is. An Aurifil thread is a thread that I've seen reviews on that gives you less lint, and for some reason you can get more thread on your bobbin. So this is what I've been using currently. Aurifil thread. I really like it. I do have something called cotton and steel. This is also 50 weight, and it is 100% cotton. And this one is made where? This is another Italian-made cotton. I don't know what company actually makes this. The thread itself is spun in Egypt, and it is distributed or spun onto the spools in Italy. So let's say this might be Egyptian cotton. Another brand that I have is Mettler, M-E-T-T-L-E-R. This is another brand that I got before I purchased. Right after Gutmann, I got Mettler just to see how it was. It was pretty decent, a little bit of dust on it, but you know, it had some nice colors, so I decided to go with that. For the most part, in my 100% cotton box, I have Gutmann, Aurifil, and Mettler in here, and that one spool of cotton and steel. All right, so let's move on to my container of polyester 50 weight. Now, you will notice that I have quite a bit, because at the time I was purchasing Gutermann, and that's what most of this thread is, Gutermann. I have a dual duty, which is a Coates and Clark, a little bit thicker polyester thread. I do have a couple of spools of that, as you can see. It's a little bit stronger than the cotton. It takes a lot to break it, as you can see here. I do have some Sulky polyester deco thread. I do have some Suology, which I think is a Hobby Lobby brand. And then I have a couple of spools of thread that I just picked up or people gave to me. These, I don't even know what the weight is, or I don't even want to say if it's cotton or not. I just have it in my polyester box because I do. I do have another box upstairs in my main sewing room that is a lot of Coates and Clark before I started becoming more of an aficionado of threads. Again, this is 100% polyester, 50 weight, which is used for piecing. I prefer 100% cotton because I sew with 100% cotton. So I like my 100% cotton fabric and my 100% cotton batting to have 100% cotton thread. Now this, you can see, is a cotton, and I didn't write down cotton poly because there is cotton poly in the box. And this is my 30-40-12 weight thread. Let's see, this is my 30 weight thread, and as you can, oops, I'm pulling the wrong one. As you can see, it's a little bit thicker. This is used for top stitching or quilting itself. You're quilting your fabric. It's a little bit thicker. What did I say? This was 30? Or maybe this is 40 weight. Let's see if it's listed on here. This is 30 weight. I wrote it in with pencil. This is 30 weight, and my last quilt, which I'll show you a demonstration later, is quilted with this variegated gray. It really turned out really, really nice. This one is a 40 weight cotton, and this is by Suology. It's a really nice thick cotton thread. I like the way it works. I like the way it comes out. I did some wall hangings, and I used this as a for the top stitching. Now this one is a 12 weight, and this 12 weight cotton is 100% cotton. It's the Petite Cotton collection. I think I purchased this off of Amazon because I was curious as to what 12 weight would be, and you can see it's pretty thick. It's almost like an embroidery thread, and I believe it is primarily used for embroidery thread, but I will show you later in the video the 50, the 30, the 50, the 50, the 30, and the 12 weight stitching. I believe that's what I'm going to be doing. So Let's recap. Cotton, 100% cotton, 100% polyester, or a cotton poly 50-50 blend. 50 weight is used for piecing, 40 weight and less is used for top stitching, quilting, or something called sashiko stitching. And sashiko stitching is a Japanese form of stitching, and I will toss in here a picture of sashiko stitching. My hands are not steady enough to do sashiko stitching, and Baby Lock does make a sashiko stitching sewing machine. Oh my gosh, that is on my bucket goal list to get. It is a little bit on the pricey side, but it is a very specialized machine. And sashiko is, again, a Japanese form of hand stitching where you have your thread and then a little bit space in between the next thread stitching. And again, I'll throw in a picture somewhere in this video, probably after this scene, on what a sashiko stitching looks like. It is absolutely beautiful, and that is something that I want to learn how to do. Okay, why don't we move on and let me show you how these threads work on my machine with the different thread lengths. As you can see here, this is a picture of sashiko stitching. It is primarily used on indigo colored fabric with white thread. And it is stitching either a pattern, an image, or even white lines going horizontally and or vertically. As you can see here, the stitching is very precise. There's a stitch and a space and a stitch and a space and a stitch and a space. In more recent times, people have begun to use the sashiko stitching on other color fabrics besides the indigo, and they have moved onto using a different color of thread besides white. Sashiko stitching uses a certain thickness of thread, I believe a 12 weight, and they use a very specialized flexible needle. On every sewing machine, you'll find an item that's like this, either a button, or if you have an electronic sewing machine, you'll have a button where you can raise the numbers of your stitch length. Most of them go from 1, which this one is set at. My mark is right here. The silver thing right here is my marking for stitch regulator. Goes 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Now my machine, if you can hear, clicks. So I actually go from 1, 1.25, 1.5, 1.75, 2, and I can make the increment or the stitch longer. I can go as high as 7. So it starts at 1 and goes all the way around to 7. So what I want to demonstrate here is each of the stitches that are used to piece together items to make your block. So let me adjust the camera so you can see what I'm talking about. I am going to demonstrate the different stitches that are used with the different threads that we have, that I've discussed. I am using 100% cotton duck cloth, which is a little bit thicker. I don't have 2 layers, so I am not using a walking foot. A walking foot is used so that both layers are sent through the machine at the same time. I don't want to mess up my walking foot with using 1 layer, so I changed it back to my regular sewing foot. I have my machine set at 1 using the button that I showed you previously, and I'm going to put my needle down into the lower position so that I can butt my fabric up to the needle. Now, sorry, I'm going to try to sew without keeping my hand in the way, and I have the machine set at 1. As you can see, my fabric is not moving through my machine quickly because I'm making a very small stitch. And I'm going to stitch all the way through. I'm going to make it a little bit faster so that we're not wasting video time. I am currently stitching at stitch selection 1. Up, down, pull, cut. Now you can see here, let's see if we can get this to register. It's a very tiny, tiny stitch. And you can see I'm using a lighter color for the bobbin. As you can see, it's just a very, very tiny, tiny stitch. I very rarely use this length of stitch because I personally do not like the way it comes out. So I'm going to move my thread over, or I'm going to move my fabric over, butt it up against the needle, and I'm going to select 2.5, which is the standard length to piece together quilts. This is the size I like to use. Again, I'm going to try not to hide the stitching. I'm just going to start it off right here. Now you notice that my fabric is being pulled through the machine a little bit quicker, and I don't have the machine running at a faster speed. And we're done. Now, can you see the difference? Let's see, can you see the difference between one and the other? Maybe if I lay it down right here. This way, you can see the difference. This one right here is the 2.5. This one is 1. Now let me increase my stitching, my stitch length. Again, I'm going to give you some space here so you can see, and I'm going to raise it up to 4. And watch how fast the fabric goes through the machine at a stitch length number 4. See how fast that went through? Now, generally for using a stitch 4, when you use a stitch 4, that's usually more for top stitching or quilting. Can you see the difference? Again, this is number 4. This one right here is number 4. This one's 2.5. And this is 1. Do you see how your thread looks at each stitch regulation? This one, 2.5, is the standard for piecing together, and 3 or 4 is what most people will use to top stitch. Now, I am going to switch threads, and I'm going to put a 30 weight onto the machine. And remember, I told you 30 weight is the 30 weight, 40 weight and below. You can go from 40 weight, 30 weight, I believe there's a 20, and I actually have a 12 weight, which is used for top stitching. Let me switch it over to a 40 or 30 weight, and once I select the color, I'll let you know what the weight is, and you will see the difference of how the thread looks when you're top stitching. So give me a moment, I'll come right back. Because my selection of top stitching, quilting, embroidery thread is still very minimal, I don't have a lot of colors to choose from. So what I've chosen for this demonstration is a medium gray, 100% cotton, 40 weight. Now, remember I said when we're talking about classifying the thickness of the thread, it's called weight. The larger the number, the thinner the thread. So, piecing thread is 50 weight. I'm about to show you and demonstrate that I'm using a 40 weight, and it is, you can notice the difference between the thickness of the two. So I am going to start this stitching, which would be primarily used for top stitching, at number 3 stitch length. Again, I'm using gray in color, and I'm going to try not to mess anything up with the camera. If I could find my foot pedal here. Okay, here we go. You notice that the machine is pulling my fabric through quickly. Alright, it's off. Now let me show you what it looks like. This is a number 3 stitching. Can you see that the thread is a little bit thicker? Now, with that being said, your bobbin thread will always be a 50 weight. You're using a 50 weight thread in your bobbin. It should coordinate with the top color. I don't want to wind a bobbin to use, to waste a bobbin to use for this demonstration, so I'm using a lighter gray for my 50 weight bobbin. My next stitch size is 4. I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. This is at a stitch length 4. Now you're going to notice a difference in how the thread pops up. You see, you can see this is a 3, this is a 4. Now I'm going to go ahead and raise it up to a 5. And then we're going to see another difference. And we're done at a stitch 5. Can you see the difference here? Let me double it. Let me see. This one is a 3. This is a 4. No, wait. I can't even tell right now. Okay, I'm sorry. This is a 3. This is a 4. And this is a 5. Can you see the difference? Let's see if, there you go. Now you can see. 3, 4, 5. Now, I personally like the number 4 because it gives it a nice depth. It gives it a nice look. I just like the way it lays. Now, let me show you a quilt I recently did. And I did it with shadowing the stitches. And I used, this is a 30 weight thread using a number 4 stitch line. See? I don't know if you can really see how nice it looks. It's kind of hard to see. Maybe let me move to a different camera angle so that you can see how this looks. I really like the way this turned out. So now I have my machine set at a number 6, so let's see what that looks like. And it's really pulling the thread, the fabric through the machine really quickly. You can kind of see the contours of the stitch. Kind of looks nice. And now I'm going to take it all the way up to the final stitch, which is a number 7. And let's see what that looks like. Wow, it's really grabbing the fabric through. Okay. I've not had to adjust my tension, and again, like I said earlier, I'm going to take this to the table and lay it down so that you can kind of see really well the different sizes. We started at 3 and we finished at 7. Before I walk away from the machine, I'd like to do some stitching using number 12 weight, which is a pretty thick piece of thread. I believe this thread is more for doing embroidery. This machine that I use is just a professional straight stitch, so it's going to be the first time that I'm going to be using the number 12 thread. So let's see what that looks like on this machine. So while we are on the subject of thicker threads, remember you need to change your needles on your machines. I am using a number 12 weight thread, so I should be using a jeans denim needles thread. It is a 130, no, I'm sorry, it's a 100 by 16. The opening of the eye is a little bit thicker, and the needle is a little bit thicker and a little bit more pointier. So you can see here, I've got two packages. Got regular universal needles, and then I have the jeans and denim needles. Let's see if I can get this out. There you go. So make sure that you change your needle when you are doing your sewing, because you don't really want to mess up your machine, nor do you want to break your needles. Okay, with that being said, I am now using a 12 weight thread, and if you can see, this is a pretty thick thread. Let's see if we can get it a little bit closer. There you go. I am going to start sewing at a number 4 using the 12 weight thread. Again, I have not changed the bobbin. Let's get you a little bit closer so we can see what we're doing here. There you go. I have not changed the bobbin. I have 50 weight in the bobbin. Number 4 stitch length. So here we go. Let's see what this looks like. Again, you see that the machine is pulling the fabric quickly through the machine. And because I am using a lighter color on the bobbin, you will see a more differentiated line right there. Now I'm going to move it up to a number 5, and let's see what that looks like. I'm going to move it up to a number 6. And then finally a number 7. And once I'm done sewing, we're actually going to go to the cutting mat where there's a little bit better light, and we can see all the 50 weight, the 40 weight, and the 12 weight stitching. And then I will compare them. Okay, done sewing. Let's move to the table. Now remember, we started off with our piecing weight, which is 50 weight. All the threads that I used were 100% cotton, but you know, again, there's cotton, there's polyester, and then the most common ones are cotton, polyester, and cotton poly brand. I prefer 100% cotton, even though, like you saw in my containers, I have a lot of polyester. And that was because I didn't know the difference between polyester and cotton with reference to sewing. So I digress. All right, so we use the 50 weight thread right here. We started off with a 1, and you can barely see any differentiation of stitching. Any differentiation of stitching. Let me see if I can get you closer. This one is the number 1. I did 2.5, which is the standard for stitching on quilting, and then I did a 3. Then the next type of weight I did was 40. And here's the 40. I started off with a 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 stitch length. And you could see, maybe at the top you could see up here, how the bobbin thread, let me see, I'm trying to fix this so you can see it, how the different stitch lengths look with a 40 weight. And then finally I used a 12 weight, and I started at a 4. This is a stitch length of 4, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, of course, I'm not using 2 thicknesses or 3 thicknesses of fabric, so it's going to be a little bit different how you see it. Now, let me show you what I prefer in stitching when I'm stitching my quilts. And I'm going to back you off just a little so that you can see this quilt. This is a baby quilt, and I did shadow stitching. And shadow stitching, from my understanding, is you're shadowing your seam line, 1/4 inch on each side. So what I did is I used a 30 weight thread with a size 4 stitch length. Let's see if we can get you to see it a little bit closer. Move this so you can see it a little bit closer. Can you see it? No, let's see. All right, right there. There you go. Right there. You can see the corners right here where I did that, and then you can see where I shadowed the seam right here. This kind of quilting or stitching is very forgiving, especially if you don't match your corners, which in this particular corner I kind of did. So when you're doing the shadow stitching, it kind of hides the mistake you made. But I like the way that this turned out. Let's see if you could see it a little bit better. Again, this is using 30 weight, 100% cotton at stitch length 4. I hope this video has been somewhat on the informative side. Like I said, I was kind of shocked to learn that in quilting, you need to know a little bit more about threads. I knew the very basics for garment sewing, but I had no idea that as you do your quilting, you need to have different thicknesses of threads, and you need to have different lengths in stitching. So with that being said, I showed you how that quilt looked, and it really looked beautiful to me. And it was the first quilt that I ever made that didn't have puckers and unsightly looking stitching. I was quite pleased, and that was because I was using for the top stitching or the quilting part, I was using 30 weight, and I used a number 4 stitch length. My name is Liz. We are at EMO's Creative Studio, where anything and everything you create is beautiful because you created it. Like, subscribe, share on social media. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at EMOSLIZ. You can also look down in the comments and find my email address. Until the next time, happy quilting, happy sewing. Bye.